Welcome to the second day of Iowa Ideas. This is the 9th year for this conference, which kind of blows my mind. But the conference is great because it explores topics important to Iowans with a focus on ideas that can help us meet the challenges of today and plan for the future. The Gazette would like to thank the presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest. This support makes these virtual sessions free for everyone. I'm Erin Jordan, a former longtime Gazette reporter, and I now teach journalism at the University of Iowa. I'll be your moderator for the conversation today about how federal funding cuts have affected conservation in Iowa. Before the panelists introduce themselves, I wanted to let the audience know you may submit questions for the guests through the Q&A box or in the Zoom chat, and then we'll work as many of them into the conversation as we can during this hour-long session. So let's get started. If each of our panelists could introduce themselves and their connection to the topic, that would be great. Ashley, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ashley Coffin. I am the director of the Center for Energy and Environmental Education at the University of Northern Iowa. And our center is really focused around taking our staff and programming expertise focused around environmental and public health, local food, energy programming and conservation and natural resource management, and engaging volunteers, students, community members to connect those dots together. So really serving Iowa communities and serving them through kind of those various branches and connecting information and resources. So I'm excited to be here.
Great. Jason?
All right, thank you everyone for joining this morning to talk about this. My name is Jason Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of Borough Land Trust based out of Iowa City. We are a nonprofit land trust that focuses on the restoration of woodlands, wetlands, prairies in Iowa. And as part of our organization's mission, we actually have an AmeriCorps program that was cut, which is part of the conversation today. And so going to be talking about that as well as some of the other cuts that we've seen in Iowa and conservation.
That's great. So just kind of jumping in on that, as Jason said, I know AmeriCorps is something we want to talk about today. Ashley, could you tell us first, what is AmeriCorps and how did the federal funding cuts last spring affect your organization, immediately?
Yeah, sure. So our center actually is home to two very large AmeriCorps programs. We have an AmeriCorps state program called Green Iowa AmeriCorps, and we have an AmeriCorps Vista program called Nourish Iowa. And AmeriCorps, for those who aren't familiar, is a national service program that really has its roots back all the way in the Civilian Conservation Corps of like New Deal policies of the 1930s, really that was created out of putting people back to work on civic projects. And over many, many decades, in the 1990s, the Corporation for National and Community Service in AmeriCorps was born. And out of that, the opportunity for Americans to serve America, very similar to what you would see, or a lot of people can understand the concept of Peace Corps, essentially, where we have people put into service positions to do work in environment, housing, economic development, health, education. AmeriCorps operates in that very same way, only it's serving here in America. And so people are signing up to serve their country in a different way, to partner with nonprofit organizations, schools, municipalities to serve their community in that way. So our organization utilizes that through our two programs that I mentioned, doing environmental stewardship work, focusing on food access. And earlier this year, back in the spring, when AmeriCorps termination came through, we were fortunate in that our program was not immediately terminated and that we weren't one of the programs in Iowa listed as an immediate termination, though around 50% of the programs, I think out of the 25 Iowa programs, 15 were immediately cut on that list. And we're given about, I think, 9 days to kind of wrap things up, which was incredible. So for us over that time, it was us, a lot of communication reassuring our program host sites, our members, how they can continue to function in their roles. And then it was also just being good allies within our AmeriCorps network and our environmental network. We ended up taking on 12 other AmeriCorps members whose programs had been terminated from Polk County Conservation, from Iowa State 4-H and Outreach. So really having those members who had signed up to serve being able to come over to our program and try and complete their term of service as normally as possible, I guess. But still, all of that uncertainty, all of the internal operations capacity that had to be created to kind of accommodate for some of this for us was a challenge. But I would also echo that such a small challenge in comparison to the programs that really had to deal with this out of the blue, totally unwarranted termination of their programs. So I think we were fortunate in that way, but it still created such a unnecessary kind of upheaval of everything that we had to adjust to quickly.
Oh, yeah. And Jason, the Borough Land Trust relies on AmeriCorps. What plans were in place for you that had to be either dropped or scaled back or delayed?
Yeah, at the end of April, we were cut. And so we were one of those programs, the 50% in Iowa that were terminated. And the notice came in. We had to basically bring our crew in that day and tell them that, within an hour's notice, they had served their last day with our program. And this was in April. There's a lot of stewardship work that happens. The work that they do is mostly outside. And so all of the work that they were going to do on our properties, as well as a number of other properties that are in eastern Iowa, we had major plans for the summer. So there's a lot of invasive species removal work. There's a lot of trail mowing and access work that's done. All of that had to be pared down because you can't go from, we had with including AmeriCorps, we had a team of around 16. When AmeriCorps was taken away from us, we had a team of 4. So you just cannot do the same amount of work with 4 individuals that you can with a team of 16. So a lot of that work, we had to just prioritize everything. What's the highest priority? And unfortunately, we had a number of people that would call in, let us know, hey, these trails need to be mowed. There's trees over this area, things like that. And we were just scrambling to try to get as much of that work done that would have been done through the AmeriCorps service throughout the summer. So it was a pretty big hit, but we were able to bring on 3 of those members. We were able to bring them on as temporary staff. And so that did help. But again, you can't, even with 3 individuals, you can't make up all of that service that would have been provided by the AmeriCorps crew.
Thinking about those 10 or more people who didn't have opportunities, what kind of went away for them? Were these are young people who suddenly didn't have a summer job?
Yeah, it was very unfortunate for them. So they had started with us. All of them had started with us in September. So from September until the end of April, every single day, they're serving with this crew. They get to know each other, their colleagues, their coworkers, and then to call them in and say, hey, not only are all of you, done for the summer, you're not going to see each other again. You don't have jobs. All of them had apartments and, rent to pay and everything else. And there was just really no information that was provided to us with regards to here is what the next step is going to be for these individuals. So we did work with a number of them and a number of organizations within our community to help try to find them positions. Most of them, we were able to do that. Fortunately, all of them were able to stay in the area. But it was not easy for those individuals. And I think for all the stories that we talk about with conservation cuts in Iowa, a lot of the individuals, the jobs that are lost, they're the ones that we're really not talking about all that much, those individual stories.
Yeah. And maybe we can touch on this later too, but it just seems like that these experiences are probably critical to training the young people for conservation careers.
They are. And Ashley, I know that your program does a lot of work with regards to career development. That's one of the things that we really try to focus on. We know that they're going to be with us for a very short period of time, 1 year, years. But what we can do is not only instill in them like the kind of the spirit of conservation work, but really bring those skills up, bring their certification levels up so that when they go on to the next career, whatever it might be, the next job, they have the ability to take that portion with them. And it's been incredibly successful. We've seen individuals go to a number of organizations and to have all of that just removed. And at the time we thought it was permanent. it really just destroyed the model that we had developed.
Yeah, I would echo Jason's sentiment in that, we know how long our members are going to be with us. This is a set time frame of service, and we're pouring into them and they're pouring into us in this kind of agreed upon relationship where they're serving their communities. We're building into them experience, networks, skills, training, for them to continue to bring that forth to be a prepared person in the job market in these conservation fields, right? And so to pull that opportunity out from under them really kind of leaves them sort of in this middle ground where they're not being able to be given the same opportunities that they had signed up for. At the same time, our community isn't benefiting in the same way to have skilled individuals entering the workforce in the same rate that they could have, right? And we're not having people who are boots on the ground doing conservation efforts in our community. And I think one of the other things that's worth mentioning too, outside of just AmeriCorps service, when we're talking about environmental and conservation, we saw a lot of impacts when we're talking about like cuts to things like the forestry service and national park jobs and some of this other sort of environmental spaces and federal work. And I think the thing that was really disheartening to me was we have a lot of young people who are coming to us because they want to go work in a national park. They want to be a county conservationist. They want to do, these jobs. And when they're seeing kind of the instability created for some of those positions, it's causing them to almost rethink their entire career path at points, right? Like, oh my gosh, like I want to go work for the forestry service. And yet I'm seeing these positions kind of unceremoniously, shut down in Yellowstone, so I think that's a larger conversation too, to say there are some pretty significant implications when we act like entire sectors of our workforce are suddenly going to be really unstable to young people, and then pulling opportunities for them to train or conduct research or get scholarships to go to school in some of these areas that are really important to our future and for them to be able to pursue. So I think that was another thing we really saw too, was people kind of, holding their breath to see how some of those other federal jobs that are environmentally focused are going to pan out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, and of course, these cuts that have come from the administration, the federal administration since January, aren't just to AmeriCorps. I wondered if each of you could tell us about one other area of federal funding reductions that may have affected Iowans since then. Do you want to start, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things was with the cuts to the NRCS funding that was proposed in 2025.
And that's the Natural
original budget
Resources Conservation Service.
Yes, my apologies. Yes, a lot of acronyms. So with the NRCS funding, that was proposed to be cut from around 900 million to 100 million across the board for their discretionary spending. And those are the programs that allow individuals that are farming to do all of the conservation work that is so desperately needed in this state. So I think that it's really that alone says so much about the state of conservation funding. That's what we rely on. The taxpayers are funding these organizations. They're funding the federal government so that these programs are provided back to the citizens. And when they're cut like that, there's no replacement. No one's going to be able to go out and find that level of money for individuals to be a part of those programs anymore. So in Iowa, most of those programs, or all of them, are voluntary. And so it's not as if we're going to have a bunch of organizations stepping in and providing all of these same services because the money is just not there. So unfortunately, we have voluntary programs that are just not going to be funded.
Well, and just to kind of emphasize some of the things that NRCS would do, they might split the cost for you if you want to plant cover crops, or probably, lots of other things that help farmers implement conservation practices to keep runoff keep fertilizer out of runoff and lots of other things way beyond that. But
Yeah, buffer strips are a huge one in Iowa, and so being able to take certain land out of production so that that land is used to filter out nitrates and phosphates. There's that's just a minor example of all of that work. But really slashing it to 10% of what it potentially could be would have been disastrous. Fortunately, for 2026, that number was increased some, but they're still looking at reductions for the NRCS programs moving forward.
Yeah, I think for me, I would transition to a lot of our center's local food work. So that's a large program operation that's we have some AmeriCorps program that's tied in there with our Nourish Iowa program that's working with entities throughout the state to do local food access capacity. But otherwise, a big part of our center's focus and has been for 30 years is strengthening our regional food system. And so much of that is impacted by our ability to build a food system that has both buyers and producers where we can actually eat the food that we're growing and access it through, larger institutional buyers, through restaurants, through farmers markets. And two of the largest cuts that we saw through the USDA was the local food purchasing assistance program and the local food for schools program. So the LFPA was $1 billion cut out of that USDA program. And so to give just one example of how we saw that impacted at our center over the course of this summer, our center has two very large community gardens focused in the Waterloo neighborhoods that has a large number of immigrant and refugee populations who are utilizing those to gain skills to not only feed their families, but are emerging farmers. Essentially, they want to gain the skills, gain access to the land, the entrepreneurial backgrounds to be able to sell that food as part of our regional food system. And then last year, because of the LFPA, our local food bank was able to buy almost $27,000 worth of food from that group produced at our community garden to then provide as local produce through our local food bank. I mean, what an incredible success story, in my opinion, right? Like locally grown food by new Iowans to our food bank that's getting nutritious food back into our communities, right? That is a win every way you look at it. Because that money is cut, none. There's $0, not $27,000, not $25,000, not $15,000, zero. So now we have those same families who are going, well, I don't even know if I need this size plot next year. Maybe I'll just grow for my family next year. I don't know where this produce would go, right? And so, what a step backward, really, when you're making so much progress to build these systems and these successes and these networks and this buy-in from so many partners, right? The city of Waterloo to create the space, us as a partner to create the resources, the families to buy in, the food bank to buy in. Everyone has stake in this. And so then to try and just have this slide back, is so disheartening. And I know we've heard from so many local farmers who have, bought more equipment, who have bought more seed, who have bought more infrastructure, planning on those LFPA dollars to produce more. And then to see those, be pulled has been really devastating. And the same for local food for schools. I mean, I don't know that anybody is really sitting around saying, I wish we had, less healthy local food in our schools. I don't know that is a sentiment anywhere. And so the idea that we're not, trying to champion as an agricultural state, one that really should be advocating for more ways that we can regionally feed our kids and use our own soil to do it. So that's a big one that I think we really have seen within our network where we've seen, a real kind of setback as it relates to strengthening our local food system because of the cuts at the federal level.
That's huge. So if the Federal Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, has decided that some of these programs are wasteful, they kind of fit within their definition of that, has the federal government since then outlined new priorities for which funding will be available? I don't know, Ashley, if you want to take a stab at that one.
Yeah, I can try. I mean, we have seen none. I think that as an environmental program, I've been working in kind of this field for 15 plus years at this point. So we've seen a few administrations roll through. And we understand that the priorities within each administration are going to change a little bit, as far as their focus on environment, economic development, conservation, it's going to shift some. But usually always there is some approach that makes sense for our work to serve Iowans, whether it's workforce development, economic development, whether it's, looking at housing, food, or looking at, conservation resource management. I feel like, they have kind of emptied the cupboard and then and left a little bit. They haven't given us any direction as to where they do feel like they have new set priorities. And that can be really frustrating because, we've seen this being approach, where they've kind of gone in and made really significant deep cuts to programs that have been relied upon for a very long time. And as Jason said, is no quick fix or even a realistic fix to make up at a state or a local or a private level. And they have also not identified any necessarily new federal funding sources that are going to be available to folks that fits their priorities. That hasn't been something that I feel has come out, over the last, 8 months. Our center has had to almost completely transition to looking at how can we do cost recovery and fee for service? How can we look at private or corporate donations? How can we look at cost savings? Though I feel like we're already operating on a pretty cost efficient model as it already is. And so, yeah, I think that's another real challenge is that we anticipate and understand everybody's priorities are going to be different, but to give no new direction necessarily is really hard for people to be able to pivot and align themselves with where funding may be available in the future.
Jason, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah. Ashley's answer was much more politically correct than mine, I would say. So, I mean, the short answer is no. There has been absolutely no guidance with regards to any sort of direction that individuals want to see. I think a lot of it was done from afar with no knowledge of what actually is happening on the ground. And so things were being cut, not because they were not performing well, not because they weren't effective, not because they weren't efficient. Things were being cut because there was a supposed need to cut. And I personally disagree with the approach. Had they come to us and they said, we really need to focus on cancer research this year, and so we're not going to be able to provide your programs with certain percentage of the money so that we can focus on cancer research. That's something that individuals can understand and get behind. But to say we're going to cut these programs, but we're also going to cut all this other stuff like cancer research, it just makes you feel as though they're drawing the programs that are cut out of a hat, and whatever happens, happens. So I do feel as though, unfortunately, a lot of very, very successful programs were caught up in the mix. And we were fortunate. We were able to bring our program back. But I do know that there are a lot of organizations out there that once that funding is cut dry, their organization and all the support they're providing their communities go away. So yeah, it's been an odd year with regards to the decisions that are being made.
You, Jason, again, I'll shoot this one your way, but how have you already changed the way you speak about the work you do, maybe in an attempt to not draw the eyes of folks who are cutting, or to just kind of maybe change your focus or speak about things differently?
Yeah, it was an interesting time when we were resubmitting our grant, because we were asked to remove certain words, certain phrases, certain topics from our grant applications. And in our mission statement, we talk about the need to improve biodiversity in the state of Iowa. It's part of our mission. It's very critical. Biodiversity has the word diversity in it. And so every single application that we were submitting for a federal program, we were getting kind of tagged because we were talking about diversity. So we have had to change to basically get in, under the radar to some degree, which is unfortunate. This is not something that people should be ashamed of, talking about diversity or biodiversity. This is something that people should be proud of. And so that has been unfortunate, because we feel as though we've been forced to somewhat play the game in order to actually, receive some of this funding. With our community, though, I think one of the really interesting things has been to show them, like, if you value what we're doing in this community, like, now is the chance that you have to step up, own it, make it part of what you do for your own personal donations, your own personal giving. That's been a very positive message. And I know groups like Iowa Public Radio have had the same issue. They had 10% of their funding cut. That's not necessarily just conservation, because obviously they report on everything, but there's a lot of conservation discussions that are happening on that program. And so they've had conversations about, if the community that listens to us really values this, now is the time that you can show that by supporting this. And so we've had those conversations. At the same time, it is incredibly difficult. We lost 25% of our budget. It's incredibly difficult to go to even new individuals and say, hey, this is the shortfall we're trying to make. Are you able to support us at that level? That's very difficult to do.
Well, and just speaking to that, realistically, what are the funding sources available that can make up for the amount of money? If you're looking at 25% of your budget, or 10%, or realistically, are there other pots of money that you can tap into to fill that need? Ashley?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, that would be the short answer to this. Use the LFPA funds, 1 billion. Yeah, I can't go to like my neighbor down the street and say, you like local food, can you give me $250,000 to, run my program? I just think that, the reality is, as much as we can go back and forth about it, public dollars, tax dollars, should go for public good, right? And our environment is a public good. And I don't think that there's a way to really separate the two necessarily. It's like where we live, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the land we're on, that is a public good, a necessary public good. And tax dollars should support those things. And, the reality is that because these cuts have been so sweeping, because there hasn't been an alternative approach to funding at the federal level, everyone is looking to their neighbor and their community foundation and private donations and all these things. And so, I think almost everywhere we've turned, they've said we've had a number, and I would argue for even what we would, I don't want to say small pots of money, but at times, maybe it's $2,000 for this project or that project, not 25% of your budget, certainly. And oftentimes maybe has some significant, lift as far as like the compliance and the reporting and the everything else. And they go, we've had record applications for this, and so I think it's important to note that everybody's looking towards those same dollars. Those dollars are not, and should not, more importantly, have to make up for what is happening here. And it's not how programs like ours, it's not the most effective use of our time to spend suddenly, instead of, 50% of our time as a program manager at my center shouldn't have to now transition spending X amount of their time doing fundraising instead of program execution for their communities, right? I guess I would ask Iowans, like, would you prefer people out in your community planting trees, growing gardens, doing educational work, or having to sit at their desk trying to hustle for $1,500 at a time? That's not their expertise. That's not how we should be spending our time, energy. We should be out in our communities serving Iowans. And this creates that strain on organizations like ours, I think, and others, so many others.
Jason, you've talked about how the Burr Oak Land Trust recruits young people from out of state to work in Iowa. What does that do for the state, and how do you see these cuts affecting kind of the ongoing recruitment of Generation Z?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that Ashley's program, all AmeriCorps programs do this. They recruit. There's a very wide web that's woven for AmeriCorps recruits, and we bring individuals in, very competent, very strong individuals from all over the country. And for individuals to come from Idaho, from Maryland, from California, from all these different states to Iowa is the absolute reverse of what we're seeing happen within the state. And so we hear about this young brain drain that's constantly happening. Individuals graduate from high school, go to college in another state. Individuals come to Iowa to go to some sort of program at a university, and then as soon as they graduate, they move to a different state. So we're seeing the reverse of that by utilizing, again, federal tax dollars through the AmeriCorps program to bring individuals in that are coming at a very important part of their life. And so when they're coming here in their early 20s, they're meeting individuals in Iowa. A lot of them are starting families in this state. They're not going to necessarily all just leave as soon as their service is over. So it is not the answer. The numbers are small compared to the numbers that are leaving. But at the same time, we're also bringing in some some phenomenal people. And we're providing them with a reason to come to Iowa. So there's so many reasons for individuals to leave. We're finally bringing them in for a good reason. We're providing them with all this work. And unfortunately, we thought that was also going to all be gone last spring.
So Iowa has seen reductions in grants or other funding for organizations that monitor environmental health. For example, the network of sensors that measure nitrate and other water quality factors on Iowa's rivers is scheduled to lose state funding in 2026. And I think that's about $500,000 annually. Also, the Trump administration has ended a nationwide hunger survey. When you don't measure or monitor something, what's at risk of happening?
I'll take the first part of this. So you mentioned the water quality monitoring. So that was the ISU Nutrient Research Center funded through state dollars, funded all of these water quality research stations in Iowa. That state funding actually was removed last year. And so they received some funding from the Walton Family Foundation to be able to push it to 2026 through that private family foundation. They're going to do that at this point. So what we have is one of the ways, probably one of the best water quality monitoring systems in the country, not just in Iowa, but within the country, in a state that has some of the poorest water quality. And our state has said we no longer want to run that system because basically we don't like the results that it is putting out. The numbers that it's coming out don't make us look good. And that is an absolute fallacy. The thinking behind that is absolutely crazy. It's like if you were to say, hey, I'm going to remove the gas gauge from my car because it keeps telling me that I'm almost out of fuel. It makes no sense at all. If you do not monitor all of these different factors, it doesn't mean that they go away. It's the same mentality when the idea behind, there are too many cases of COVID that are being reported. So if we stop testing, then we're going to have fewer cases of COVID reported. It's the same mentality behind that. It makes absolutely no sense. So I know that with regards to the Iowa Water Quality Information System, that network that was developed, the Isaac Walton League has stepped up. And so this is a great example of what you were talking about before. Isaac Walton League stepped up. They're trying to raise $500,000 to keep that program going for one more year. But taxpayers in Iowa have already paid for that system. The money just isn't being allocated to the program anymore. So, I am very hopeful that they're able to raise those funds, but that's a real steep number to get to within 1 year. And then it's just 1 year. They're going to have to do that year over year over year.
And to be clear on that point, when lawmakers cut that funding, it was done in kind of a circuitous way that they reduced funding to the nutrient the center at Iowa State, and then but the implication was then that would be the money that had been routed to the University of Iowa's censor that runs the censor network. So they weren't even saying outright why they cut that, or how and why that money was cut. But it's just shows kind of the changes in priorities. But you're inferring that it's because they don't like to see the results.
Yeah, and what harm would it take? It's $500,000, which for a state budget is not a dramatically large amount. If the information is being used, if the information that's gathered is being used to help improve water quality within the state of Iowa, that is a massive bargain. But unfortunately, what it appears to me, at least, is that since the information was coming out wasn't strongly supporting the Nutrient Reduction Act, that they just they don't want to look at the information anymore.
I think that's a fair conclusion.
Yeah. I would just add that I completely agree with Jason that it makes zero sense from our seat, and from a different seat it makes total sense because it then creates zero accountability. And I think that is the real challenge, right? Because if we don't have data, then what are we using to hold people accountable? And if we don't have those measurements and numbers go up, then who's being held? Traditionally we have those numbers goes up. Somebody has to answer for that, right? If we're getting rid of our longstanding food insecurity survey, right? At the same time that we've dramatically cut, LFPA programs, local food for schools, SNAP education, we've drained these food programs. Well, now I no longer have to be accountable to the data that's likely going to tell me that more people are food insecure, right? So to me, oftentimes these measurements, surveys, like anything else, right? Probably after this conference, we would send out a survey to say, how did this go? Because we want to be accountable to the things that we produce. And when we remove those measurement tools, all it does is it removes information and accountability for the people who are responsible for it. And so I think that's a really important thing to note, that if really all we're doing is removing information, who benefits from the fact that that information is no longer available? And that's a really important thing to consider, because all we can do with information is make decisions. And so, to Jason's point, what harm is it doing to have those monitors to give us more information? Well, only if you're causing a problem with our water quality and would be accountable to it, would it be a problem for you. So I think that's a really important thing to note. I think the same story is being told about local food access. I think we're seeing it kind of at every turn. And I think it's really all of our job as citizens to hold people accountable, because at least in our line of work, if I'm trying to get funds for something, if I'm writing a grant, I'm having to use data. They're saying, demonstrate a need, right? Show me the problem in your community. And I'm having to go to census data, and I'm having to use relevant data in my state or my county. And I'm having to use that data to make the case for the fact that there's a problem. So this also has a long-term impact to go. So now I don't even have the tools to track the data for later use to make the claim for when funds are available, that there is an issue, right? So I think that's the other piece. The data collection also becomes important for us to make the case why we need support and why the resources are needed to be funneled in this direction. And that matters.
Yeah. So we're into our third day of the federal government shutdown, kind of over the impasse of funding the government. I wonder, just from the conservation front, if either of you are seeing any impacts of that, agencies you can't reach people you ordinarily would need to talk with, or sites being shut down, or are people saying, hey, I tried to visit this park. We don't have any national parks here in Iowa, obviously, but what are you hearing and seeing on that?
So we were somewhat expecting it. So there were some conversations that we had with an agency representative, a federal agency that was going to help us with some funding. And he let us know, like, hey, if I go dark, it's because of this. And I can't imagine working in that type of environment where you almost have to plan to not be able to respond to people that you are helping, because that federal system is going to remove your ability to go to work. And I think that's been what I've seen with regards to the Doge cuts that were then brought back, the shutdown where individuals are threatened to be cut now and will probably be brought back. Everything that was done, it has been done under the guise of efficiency. We're making the system more efficient. And I can't imagine a less efficient system, a less efficient use of people's time, a less efficient use of individual taxpayers' money than what I've seen this year. The shutdown is just the capper. This is just like another example of just how inefficient these systems are. And unfortunately, everyone downstream is going to be impacted by this. So we haven't really seen a massive change yet, but again, day 3. And so we will start to see that. I feel it's so unfortunate for all the individuals who are not able to go to work to do the job that they've chosen to do for the communities that are just not able to do that. I feel terrible for them.
Yeah, for us, we started our new Green Iowa AmeriCorps term on the 1st, which also aligned right with the government shutdown. For an AmeriCorps state program, being a cost reimbursement grant, in that format, we have a little bit more flexibility as far as timing. Members continue to serve as usual. However, our AmeriCorps Vista program, our Nourish Iowa program, operates a little bit differently. They're paid directly out of the federal AmeriCorps kind of web. So they've been a lot less available. From my understanding, if the shutdown is still in place at the time of their next living allowance distribution, they likely will not receive that living allowance distribution, yet they were told to continue to serve as needed, which what an ask. They're already being, I would argue, underpaid, a pretty low living allowance, generally speaking, already budgeting, but like, hey, show up to work and hope that you get your living allowance when it's due, so I just think, the thing that continues to show up for me is such a degradation of trust, that we keep asking people to trust this system, do your job, trust the process. We keep asking our AmeriCorps members to come and serve with us and trust that this is going to be a good experience and doing these things. We try, public servants. And I just don't know that we are really, as a country, like returning that favor to them at every turn. We just keep kind of shaving down that trust. And it's really, really disheartening. I think is the word that kind of consistently comes to mind. And it just feels like we continuously are arriving in this like pawns of a game that is happening somewhere else, is really how it feels. And so I think our message to everyone that we're working with in our center with our AmeriCorps members is like, just keep doing the next best right thing, control what we can control. In the places that matter most to us. But man, it is hard. It is hard to keep that energy and that optimism when, as Jason said, it's just like one more thing, that kind of keeps adding to this pile of inefficiency and letdown.
So what are some of the tasks that your new recruits, your Green Iowa folks, are going to be doing?
Yeah, so we have over 20 host sites throughout the state of Iowa where our Green Iowa members will be located. Some from county conservations, some will be in Iowa City. They'll be in Jason's back door over there in with the actual city of Iowa City, table to table in Iowa City. But others in Des Moines, Dubuque, Iowa Lakeside Lab, Burlington, White Rock Conservancy. And we have members who are working on projects that are focused on residential energy efficiency. So getting into people's homes, making them more energy efficient, gaining a lot of workforce development and how to perform energy audits and retrofitting. We have members who are focusing a lot more on the conservation and kind of resource management with our like Polk County, Jackson County placements. We have members who are doing a lot more of like expertise within like Tallgrass Prairie Center, Iowa Lakeside Lab, where they're really digging into those very specific topics. And then members who are getting kind of some really great like municipality level experience. So working with like the city of Dubuque in their sustainability office, city of Iowa City, and getting to kind of get a great sort of breadth of knowledge in how city and county government works, planning a lot of outreach projects, education, learning a lot more about policy. So this week, next week, they're kind of doing the boring stuff with us, arguably. We kind of joke they've been in syllabus day these last couple of days. And they'll be joining us on site at UNI next week for a full week of orientation to start digging into a lot of that hands-on training, you know, how to do energy audits, water quality monitoring, GIS training, some of these really cool things that are going to help aid them in their experience. But yeah, they're such an inspiring group. I'm always so excited when we do like our intro slides and get to meet people. And like, as Jason said, I have people from like Massachusetts, New York, South Carolina, you know, and they're coming to Iowa City, or they're coming to, you know, Dubuque, or we've had people who have come to Coon Rapids in White Rock Conservancy from out of state. I don't think any other reason necessarily why people would be heading over to Coon Rapids. So yeah, and such bright, energetic, you know, wonderful people. I can't like say that enough, that you know, they're kind of the like just wonderful people to bring into our state and then serve our communities. So we're really, really excited to have them and have such wonderful host sites and supervisors too that champion them and pour so much into them. So it's kind of a great thing all around. A very exhausting and busy and exciting time of the year for sure.
That's great to hear about. So for both of you, when you talk with your boards of directors or, you know, other groups that, you know, that are kind of monitoring your progress, what is your plan for the rest of this year, for next year, for coming years in terms of funding your vital operations? Jason, do you want to start?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, this was about during the time of COVID, what I realized was it was going to be critical for us as an organization, if we were going to grow, to really focus on revenue diversification. And I think a lot of people assume many nonprofits, they're kind of waiting for checks to arrive in the mail from individuals that support them. And we love working with our donors. It's amazing. But to be able to really take our organization to the next level, we knew we had to do more. And so we started working with a number of different organizations. We started looking for various markets, if you will, for us to be able to establish ourselves. And so we have a fee-for-service program where we help landowners do land management on their properties, and then they pay us to help pay for our AmeriCorps program. We have programs with a county where we're able to do mitigation projects for individuals, for developers who are impacting wetlands and woodlands. So it's just like we've really had to think outside the box to try to figure out how else can we support our community. We're still a nonprofit, first and foremost. How can we support our community? But at the same time, how can we get funding from other agencies that isn't going to require us just to ask our donors for more and more and more every single year? And so it's been very interesting to do. It's not something that most people think of when it comes to nonprofits. A lot of people think of fundraising and stuff like that. But ours has really been more about business diversification as opposed to just like additional fundraising within our organization.
Ashley?
Yeah, we have gone down a similar road to Jason. So, you know, I've been kind of unique in the timing of my role. Our longtime director, Kamyar Cheyenne, who's been the longtime director of the center here at CEEE, retired back at the end of December. And I stepped into the director role at CEEE in January, but had been kind of in his phased retirement strategic planning over these last couple of years with the same sentiment. You know, I think we were really looking to think about how can we have more agency over our work, and, you know, to not be kind of at the will and whim of what funding, you know, streams become available federally or at the state level, which is absolutely what we're seeing now. So maybe there's some foreshadowing there, but very much that like cost recovery approach, you know. So maybe historically, yeah, there's been some grants or contracts or state grants or whatever that could maybe support us doing tree planting efforts, for example, where a county or a city or whoever didn't really have to foot the bill for that effort. And now maybe we're looking at an approach to say, okay, like, are there some cost recovery or contracts we could do that would maybe help supplement that work to keep it going where maybe grants are no longer available? I also think, one thing we've been looking at too is really, of course, we're at the University of Northern Iowa, and so we're within a higher ed institution, and it's trying to balance that too. Like, what are we providing for the public good as an education institution? What are we still having to do as cost recovery to keep our center open, keep our positions staffed? So for me over the last year, and my message to our team has really been staff sustainability. How can I keep our staff? Our staff is kind of the lifeblood of nothing else happens with our programming if I can't keep our incredible staff and their expertise. So that's been my biggest priority. I pretty much tell everybody I see, if there's a staff, if it's something where you've lost staff, but you have, maybe some professional services where we have an expertise in, I would love to work with you on that, to have our staff help in that way. And also having our staff think about themselves in that way. We have incredible staff that are so knowledgeable, and being able to see themselves as kind of experts in their field and actually be able to make the ask for their time and energy when they're spending it in ways that could cover a portion of their time, which maybe they historically have not thought to do because it's been maybe covered in some other ways. So absolutely, I think this has just reconfirmed the need for us to also diversify our funding. And I agree that, and maybe in some spaces, the idea of like a dinner or a banquet or a fundraiser seems sometimes like the approach, and those are great, but it's also not going to be like what's our strength necessarily of our time and energy and expertise of our staff. And so figuring out the approaches that also are going to make the most sense for us to be able to fund the work has been important. And luckily we have a lot of really great resources at our university too, that we've reached out to see people who are doing it really well here. And they've been great mentors for us to figure out how that looks.
Jason?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Ashley said with regards to keeping staff is so vital right now. And I think that one of the things that we've attempted to do for our AmeriCorps members, as well as myself for our staff and our board for our staff, is to really try to buffer the organization from all of the negativity that keeps getting thrown our way, and that gets very difficult. And it is something where if we can absorb some of that, and it keeps the staff happy, and it keeps the AmeriCorps members serving, doing the service that they, signed on to do. We have the ability to do that, but I can tell you it is absolutely exhausting. And so our board has been phenomenal working with us. They've been very, very kind, because I would say being asked to provide a budget for if you have 25% of your funding coming in or not, is very difficult to do. And so we've had to make a lot of shifts throughout the year. So I would say it's everything that Ashley mentioned with regards to the need for stability. Trying to provide some sense of stability is so critical right now. So yeah, I totally agree.
All right, I want to kind of finish up on a positive note here. There's a lot of concerns and a lot of really important issues that you all are dealing with. What is something that you've seen, some new idea that's out there, or something that's lifted your spirits on the conservation front in Iowa or elsewhere?
We might need a minute.
I can go briefly. So every single day there's new opportunities that we are approached about, and people want to make a difference they know what's happening in the state of Iowa. They know what's happening in the country and the world with regards to the environment, right? And so everyone that I interact with, for the most part, understands this, and they're constantly thinking of things to do, how they can, protect their property, how they can manage their land, how they can work with us to try to, do things better for the environment in our area. And that is super inspiring. And so it really is amazing to be able to work with all of these individuals and to see this stuff grow in the space of adversity. And I think that you have to have the right mentality. It'd be very easy to get depressed when all of this is constantly being, again, thrown our way. But it's a bit like judo, where you just kind of have to pivot and take that and just shut it off and be able to really focus on the stuff that is going to make a major difference. And so it has been an interesting year, to say the least, for us, for Ashley, for every other organization, not only in the state, but the country. But I think that we are going to get stronger because of this. And then when the tide turns in the coming years, when that tide turns back to really being able to focus on the stuff that's really important to us, I do think we are going to be much stronger organizations for it. It's just we're kind of going through we're in the trenches at this point in time.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jason. I think, some of the narrative we've had at our center is kind of this, like, if not us, who? If not now, when? It's kind of like, this is the battle we're being called to face with. It's like, we can't really turn our backs on this issue, and our job is really to maintain this sturdiness. I think in kind of leadership, that's really your job, is to remain sturdy. And I think the thing that I find most inspiring outside of our AmeriCorps members, who are always, the challenges of them leaving us all the time, is also matched with the excitement of, like, this new and energized and exciting group of people who are sacrificing a lot to come be passionate individuals in our community. And that kind of just always continues to fill my tank. And then I think all of our work with kids also is really big for me. To me, I genuinely believe, like, us creating opportunities to connect kids to the environment and them then having a relationship with it is the most important ingredient for them being interested in protecting it. And so I think we can always do that. Like, that's not a thing that's limited by our federal government or our funding sources or anything else. And so, yeah, I think I'm working with inspiring people every single day. I see, people in community getting together. There is this bubbling at the community level that's really bringing people together. And I totally agree. This time will pass. We'll be stronger for it. And my hope is that our communities will be more unified and clarified about what needs to be done in Iowa as it relates to our environment, and all better for it as we move forward.
Well, I guess I just want to thank you both for the work that you're doing for our natural world within our little neck of the woods here in Iowa. And thank you so much for speaking about some of these important issues today. So our panelists, Ashley Coffin with the Center for Energy and Environmental Education at the University of Northern Iowa, and Jason Taylor with the Burr Oak Land Trust in Iowa City. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. The last session on the energy and environment track of Iowa Ideas is a great follow-up to what we've been discussing here. The session is about what it would take to fully fund outdoor recreation and conservation in Iowa, and that'll start at 11:50 a.m. this morning. Thanks so much to ITC Midwest for being the presenting sponsor for Iowa Ideas, and thanks to you, the audience, for joining us today. Have a great weekend and get outside.